Well, good evening, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I do honestly appreciate your presence here. I know they're still trying to figure out some of the chair situation in the back, but we'll go forward anyway. And while they're doing that, let me just give a quick layout to what tonight's going to be. Roughly speaking, I'm going to try to talk for about 45 minutes or so, and then I'm going to do 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. We are recording this, and the diocese is live feeding part of this, so once we get to the Q&A, I'm actually just going to we're going to have the recordings cut, so you'll have the freedom to say whatever you want. I will ask that during that, within reason, I saw some of your eyes. Some of those people back there are my family, and I know them. Okay, all right. But we're going to cut it for that. I would ask, though, because this is a very intense topic, and a topic that causes a lot of people to have a very personal reaction to it, I'm going to ask your questions just remain to be questions and not comments. If you have comments to say later on, please feel free to come up to me afterwards and speak about that, but I want to try to keep these time for just for questions. Let's start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, here he is, baptizing, and all are going to him. John answered, No one can receive anything except what is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is now full. He must increase, but I must decrease. Lord, we ask you to send your Holy Spirit upon us tonight. Please give me the words to say that must be said. May all things be done to your name and to your glory, both now and forever. Amen. Amen. The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael, pray for us. Good. So one other couple of housekeeping things. One, the things this talk will not be covering. For instance, I will not be talking about the hierarchy or the response to the abuse scandal. I'm not particularly interested in the policies that are being put in place or particular responses to it that have happened. Because I think that's been done to death, and partially because I have no authority to speak on those matters. The things I will be speaking about is essentially, if a person walked up to me on the street and saying to me, why on earth would you consider being a Catholic priest in today's church? That's the basic premise that I'm going to be working from. And hopefully, by extension of that, we will have cause to understand why a layperson would continue to remain in the Catholic Church, or even come to the Catholic Church if they're not already Catholic. I also want to thank the Knights of Columbus for their providing snacks in the back. So if you find yourself extremely bored, uncomfortable, or just upset or angry, you just go back there and grab a cup of coffee. And don't throw it at me. That's the rule. That's the rule. And also thanks to Jennifer and Tom and so many others who have let me beat them over the head with this topic nonstop until they gave me answers about things. Because I had no idea what I was supposed to talk about tonight. So, this talk sort of went through a lot of different manifestations and a lot of different changes. I was going to talk about just Catholicism in general, and then I was going to talk about, I almost had something about like my love story with Catholicism or something corny like that. I had all these weird sort of things going on in my head, and eventually Father Mark just broke in and said, look, this is your topic. I was like, well, okay, Father, here we go, and this is what we're going to do. So, but it convicted me. It had a serious point. He says, the original phrasing of it was different. It said, why I want to be a priest in a messy church. And then it was later on changed, why be a priest in such a messy church. But the original term, I think, really convicted me. It was questioning, okay, why am I even here? You know, I mean, on some level, get snazzy seats. There are perks, I'm not the biggest perks. But honestly, why am I bothering spending my time out in the middle of nowhere in Indiana studying for 9 months out of the year, coming home randomly to visit my nieces and nephews only on occasion, missing major portions of their growth, not able to have a family of my own, not doing all those other things, right? And it's like, well, why would you give that up? And so I really had to start looking at that. So I think to start, I want to start looking at maybe how I ended up here tonight. And it starts back really before I was born. My parents were practicing their faith. Oh, I should also mention the fact tonight is actually my parents' 45th wedding anniversary. I will not point them out. If I point them out, they will never speak to me again. And they will never come to another thing I do. So I will not point them out. But anyways, happy anniversary to my mom and dad. But years ago, before I was born, they had stopped practicing their faith. They had abandoned the faith for a number of reasons. But they weren't going to church. So eventually my father started going back to church. And I'm jumping into pieces here. If you've heard the story before, you're like, hey, wait, that's not how it went. It's because, well, I'm jumping here, okay? I'm kind of like, there's a lot to the story. I'm trying to condense it a little bit. So Peggy, stop being so harsh on those acts. Peggy's my sister who puts up with a lot of my hate. So my dad started going back to church. And I remember this one summer day where I didn't know what Dad was doing because I was like 7 at the time. And I told my dad, well, he was going out someplace, and I was like, hey, I always liked spending time with my dad. If Dad was doing it, it was fun. It was always fun. So I just said, can I go with you? And he said, sure. So he took me in the car, and we go to this place, and I don't remember much about the morning, to be perfectly honest. The only thing I do remember is looking up at the face of the priest, which I only did not know then was actually a priest, by the way, because we weren't Catholic. I come back home evidently telling my mother, I want to be a Catholic priest. She's like, well, great. Now I gotta start looking at this. And so, now some of the backstory about why they left, my mother had had a couple of miscarriages at this point, was not particularly satisfied with how other denominations had answered the question of children dying and that where they ended up, and praying to them, and it was really a very difficult issue. And so eventually we started going back to church, I started joining the RCIA and that sort of thing, and there was a point where my mother was pregnant again, and she was visibly pregnant. My pastor goes up to her and is very excited because she's pregnant again, and he loves big families, and he goes up to her and says, are you happy to be pregnant again? Big smile on his face, and her face just falls because she had lost another child. And my pastor, without her even saying a word, recognized this, pulled her immediately into the side chapel and all of us, and started praying with us, and started praying to the child, and started praying to God for intercession. And that was the moment that my mother says that was the point where she recognized I could do this. I could be a Catholic. Because they recognized the importance of human life. And that will become important for later on as the story continues. Move forward throughout the years. Let's continue with the year. 2001, 9 of my siblings get baptized at the Easter Vigil. My pastor is in heaven. He loves it. He's like ecstatic. He's having so much fun. He baptized 9 of us. We all come back to church. We're starting to do the regular thing. 2002, as so many of you know, the abuse scandal hits in Boston. Okay. Now, I'm not going to claim that I was majorly affected by this at that time, because I wasn't. I did not know the Catholic Church. I was like 7 or 8. So I didn't know the Catholic Church. But I will say this, the abuse scandal has always been something that's been in the back of my life as a Catholic. I've never been absent from that. It's always been a matter of who I was. So for instance, as we became more and more involved in our faith, we started going to St. Joseph's Cathedral for things like chrism masses and ordinations for men to the priesthood and the diaconate. And those were sort of like the highlights of my year. I always loved going to those. And to the extent that I wanted to be a priest or not, as it wavered and fluctuated, I always liked going to those. Because I always loved a particular thing, and that was all these priests marching, and I think you have to say marching in procession from the side entrance all the way up down the center aisle with these booming, strong voices, right, just singing glory to God. And you can kind of almost tell the way they walked, the way they held themselves, that these men were coming off a year of doing hard work, of getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to visit people who were sick and dying, to answering phone calls and questions, and being there for people when their child has died, being there for people when their children are born, and taking care of everybody in between. And these men all came together during these 3 times out of the year, the Chrism Mass, ordinations to the diaconate, ordinations to the priesthood, and sang glory to God and welcomed their brothers into the priesthood. It was a beautiful thing. And in some sense, I always said, I want to be like them. I want to be like these guys who can go there and do that. That's what I want to be able to do. So we started going to ordinations, like I said, early on. And I remember the first several numbers that we saw were very, very big. We have the classes of like 7 and that sort of thing, and big numbers of guys getting ordained to the priesthood, and it was wonderful. And as the years progressed and as I grew, the church had its problems, and the numbers dropped to eventually the point where we see 1, 2 guys getting ordained, if that, years where there's no ordinations. And then seeing the guys that I saw get ordained leave the priesthood, just jump ship. For any number of reasons, good, bad, or indifferent. But that was happening. So this was just part of the church, and I recognized this. Now, I think I was blessed in the fact that I was homeschooled, so I had a lot of freedoms that other kids didn't, so I was able to serve daily masses, which was a big help to my life of prayer, my life of formation, even subliminally, not really understanding it, but just being in the presence of God that often. My pastor at the time, Father Mo, did a lot of novenas. In fact, it was almost the way that I could measure at what point of the year we were in. I recognized if it was hot, we were doing the novena to the Holy Spirit or something like that. And I recognized certain things like that. That's how I measured the year, was which novena we were doing. And me and some of my siblings, we would serve all 9 nights of a novena, which included adoration, a talk, and all this other stuff. It was great. That's where I grew up. And then my pastor got transferred, and we got a new priest in, Father Gary, who's very different from Father Mo, but an excellent priest. Both are excellent priests, and both were different. And in that moment, I was realizing I was being challenged in the sense that, okay, there's more than one way of looking at priesthood. There's more than one way of understanding what it's like. This sort of started to complicate things. But anyway, I moved on. Now, mind you, from the age of like 7 to the age of like 17, I wasn't actively discerning. I'm not sitting down every night in my room praying for 3 hours and levitating and calling out to God and his mystical experiences and all sorts of stuff. Wonderful as that would be. Instead, what happens is I wake up one day and I'm 18, I'm in the shower, and I'm like, oh crap, I gotta think of this. And it was not good. So I emailed my pastor growing up, and I was like, hey, I think I had some weird sort of flowery language of how I wanted to start discerning my priesthood. Something like, it's like, how do I learn to conform my life better to Christ and this sort of thing? And I swear to God, he was looking at the email just saying, oh my gosh, this kid is an idiot. It's like, I got the response back, just come in and see me and we'll talk, we'll figure this out. So I came in to see him and I was like, great, okay. So he sits down with me and he's always happy. And if you don't know him, he's a great priest. He sits down with me, he's like, always happy, always happy. And he's like, how's your prayer life? I was like, non-existent. And he's like, okay, well that needs to change. I'm like, how do I do that? I was like, I know how to say the rosary. He's like, yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. He says, I'm talking about prayer with Holy Scripture. And I'm like, great. How do I do that? And he's like, well, here's what you do. You take a Bible and you sit down and you just open up to where you feel you need to be reading. And then you read it several times. He says, do you keep a journal? I said, no. He said, we should keep a journal. I said, I don't like to read. All right. He's like, well, I don't care. I was like, okay, all right. So I'm sitting down, and I'm like, so I go to this chapel and everything, and I'm spending all this time in prayer, and I'm flopping the page open, and I'm letting it fall sometimes open. I'm trying to be all super pious and all this other stuff. And I'm like, I'm just gonna let it fall open. And then it opens to like Leviticus, and it's like, what can I do with Leviticus? It's like all these laws about like selling sheep and stuff, and it's like, don't sell 2 at the same time. Wonderful. I'm like, so then I'm just cheating, go to the Gospels, and try to find something that I knew. But nothing came of it. Nothing came of it. I would look at the like 10 Commandments, for instance, and think, oh, here I'm going to get something. Be like, okay, great. Don't murder someone. Check. Got that one done. And I grew up with people who, heard the voice of God and heard the voice of Jesus and all this other stuff. Great stuff, and it's wonderful and fantastic. And that was never me, though. I never heard the voice of God. I never really did anything to have any effect on that. I just sort of showed up, and I figured I was a Catholic. I did the Mass thing, I did the confession thing, and I was good. Which I was, for all intents and purposes. But it wasn't at the place where I needed to be. So I kept on going back to this chapel, and nothing came of it. Especially after like 3 months or so of doing this and trying this out, I got to a point where I just fell to my knees, and I'm like, you know what, fine, I'm done. You don't want to talk to me, that's okay. We can deal with this. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little upset. I was like, you know what, you gave all these people these great things, and I asked for this, and you give me like nothing, and then I'm like, so I was getting frustrated. Eventually I calmed down, and I'm still on my knees, and I'm thinking, and I get to this point where I have this question that kind of comes into my head. And the question is, if this was all there was, would you stay being Catholic? And that was the question. Now, I didn't have a particularly great devotion to the Eucharist. I loved the Eucharist. I thought it was important. I believed it was Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity. I believed in the sacrament of confession. But I never had any major experiences of it. I certainly couldn't say I ever did. It was just sort of like, a thing I did. I did it. I thought it was important. And so this question sort of struck me to the core, and I thought about it, and I said, well, yes, of course I would keep going, because I believe in the sacraments. I believe that they're real. I believe they have an effect in your life. I think the Eucharist is something that's actual, that it means something. And I said, no, I would remain faithful. I would stay in the Catholic faith. And at that point, this next thing came in like a 2x4 across my head. And it said, all you had to do was ask. Now, when I wrote it down in my journal, it was more like, all you had to do was ask, you idiot. But it was, immediately the next scripture passage came to my head. It was, ask and you shall receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. Mind you, there's no, it might be open to you, it could be open to you, it will be open to you. It is going to happen. And that is the point where I realized I don't trust God enough. On some level, I think that's where it all started, where I recognized I don't trust God enough. So moving forward, got to the point of confirmation, went through confirmation, finally said, you know what, I've been hashing this thing about seminary back and forth, and I had one of my brothers help me with that regard. He sort of just gave me the final push and said, look, if you're going to do something about this, do it, don't just talk about it. And it was great, because it was the push that I needed. And so I eventually called up my vocation director and said, I think I should be just thinking I might be called to the priesthood. He was like, great. So he started giving me this mountain load of work to do, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to do any of this. And so you got to understand something about, before we go into the next part, when I go into college seminary, you got to understand something. I come from a family of workers. We're hard workers. We come from a family of workers where, we're beyond 9 to 5. We're the people going like 12-hour days because we like it, because we're weird, and we're like all over it. It's awesome. And my dad's an accountant, so I'd seen more than enough scenarios of people going to college, getting in massive debt, and never being able to get off from under it. So it scared the daylights out of me, this thought about going to college. And I was like, I don't really want to do this. I know I have to if I'm going to do the seminary thing. So I hemmed and hawed on it. I went back and forth, and eventually I said, I'm just going to keep going. So that was the first year. I didn't really want to pay for it. The other thing, I was like, if I'm going to go to a college, I'm not going to get a stupid degree like a liberal arts degree. I'm going to get something that I can use. So that was the second thing. Okay? For those of you who are insulted, wait a second. You're going to be able to get your revenge. I assumed, given the track record of seminaries and priesthood, I thought, can't trust the seminary or trust the guys there. So that's like 4 right now, up to. And I figured I'm just not going to like it. And the other thing was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to like studying, which I guess I still don't. But I'm pretty sure I'm not going to like the material. I'm not going to like, I'm not even going to be good at it. So I sit down with the vocation director and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. So I'm sitting down with Father Jason. He's like, he's like, yeah, so he says, you're going to go to Providence College. I was like, great. I was like, you're going to stay at the Seminary of Our Lady of Providence? I'm like, fantastic. He's like, yeah. He said, I said, I think I asked him, I said, well, what kind of a degree will I be getting? He said, well, you'll get a philosophy degree. He says, so you're basically getting a liberal arts degree. And I said, darn it, Lord, like, really? Like, see, what was happening was that I was giving God, I was saying, look, this is yours. All of this. I'm giving you, like, this big package of stuff, and this is mine. You don't touch this. This is mine, leave this alone. This is yours, this is mine. This is yours, mine. This is the deal. Wonderful. So I go to the seminary, and I'm already seeing bills arriving and that sort of stuff, and I'm like, oh. I'm not ready for this. I'm not mentally prepared for this. And I'm seeing tests arriving, and I'm like, ah. And then I'm seeing, talking to the priest and that sort of stuff, and I'm meeting guys who I'm like, these guys are weird. Or I'm weird, I don't know which. And eventually, I just thought, I'm just going to let the year run. I feel like if I go a year and it works out, great, I'll keep going. If not, that's great. What happens next? Well, one by one, every single one of those spheres just got chopped off at the knees. Every single one of them. Like, there was no, I say chopped off at the knees because there was no way of it coming back. It was just done. God was just like, yeah, no, this is completely gone. Don't worry about that ever again. It's fine. And it was just like, yeah, no, this one, gone. Love the faculty. Love the guys I worked with. Love the formation there. I got to meet some fantastic professors who knew so much about faith, so much about culture, and the beauty of culture and human nature, and how they work together to make the perfect human being. They loved the idea of the family. Guys who just stretched my understanding of so many things. And to this day, I look up to these guys in some sense just because they gave me so much to work with out of a degree that I really didn't want. So fast forward a little bit, junior year, and mind you, up to this point, I'm still thinking, look, there could come a time where I just abandon God. If I don't work hard enough at this whole seminary thing, I could just jump ship just like any other guy here. Any other guy that got ordained, they jumped, I could jump too. What's the difference? There's no difference. And that's the thing you come to realize in some sense in seminary. You recognize that, yeah, I could jump just as much as anybody else. I could leave. And I could abandon people. Just like any father, I'm sure, thinks I could abandon my family just like anybody else. I could do something really wrong. And so these are the things that went through my head. And it wasn't until my junior year of seminary, so that 3 years into seminary, working every day, praying every day, that I finally got this message from God. It was just like, you're never going to leave me. We're too deep into this. In some sense, it didn't say you were going to be a priest, absolutely. He said, you're never going to abandon me. That was the point where I relaxed a little bit. It was good again. Senior year of seminary, had a new rector, wasn't completely in love with him, wasn't a great preacher, but he was good. Anyways, last year had a couple weird bumps to it. Finished up. Now comes the big thing, second semester. Now second semester, for those who have no idea about college seminary, every guy is waiting to hear, where am I going next? Because you do 4 years of philosophy, and then you do 4 years of theology. So every guy's waiting, like, oh, this is the time. Now I'm graduating, there's only 3 of us who are graduating from the seminary. It's a very small class. Everyone's waiting, I'm waiting. I'm like, this is gonna be it. We're only sending to one seminary. Shouldn't be hard to get the phone call. I'm like, just gonna say, go to St. John's in Boston. Great, wonderful. No phone call. Okay. So, a couple months go by, and I'm like, okay, well, January, February, whatever. March, I'm like, some guys get the call in March. It's a little early, but some guys get the call in March. Got no call. Okay. April comes around, I'm like, April's gonna be it. April's gonna be the time, because he's gonna do it before graduation, and no call. No call happened. May comes around, and I'm like, okay, he's gonna hit me like maybe the day before graduation. It's gonna be really annoying, but I'll put up with it, and it's gonna be great. And get no phone call. I think I got like a congratulations text. That was about it. But that was, so I'm going through it, and I'm like, okay, well, whatever. And trying to relax. And finally, I get to, the past graduation. And I'm kind of dipping into June almost, and I'm like, we're this close. I'm like, I'm about to start my summer assignment. And I'm driving with my brother in the company van, and we're like, hey, that phone call, huh? Never came, right? I think I got kicked out and no one told me. It's like finally get a phone call from Father Mason. He's like, hey, Rory, how you doing? I'm like, great. And he's like, well, why don't you come by the rectory, we'll have a cup of coffee and we'll talk. I'm like, this ain't how I will. I'm like, this is where I get kicked out. This is where it all goes down. So I get there, we're sitting down having coffee, and we're making small talk. I'm like, can we just get to the point? Tell me where you're going to send me. Because honestly, like I said, I didn't expect to get this far, let alone all the way through graduation. And so he's telling me, hey, Rory, how do you feel about going to Indiana? And two thoughts are going through my head. Well, maybe just one. What did I do wrong? I'm going back and forth. I'm like, yes. And so eventually, now mind you, we went through the whole summer. We went out to see the place, loved the place. St. Mindgrad is wonderful. Went out to see the place. I didn't get my acceptance letter, by the way, until I got there. That's how late everything was, which was just sort of funny. They sent me an email. They were like, yeah, we're not going to bother sending you your actual acceptance letter because by the time you get it out there, you'll be here. So we're just going to keep it here. It'll be in your mailbox. So I was like, okay. So, but as all of you probably know, this past summer was when round 2 happened. And all the abuse scandal broke out. Again, all over again, right? And my old wounds were just sort of all open. They were dumping salt in it at this point. It was just bad. So I'm like, you know what, new seminary, 1,000 miles away from home, 1,000 miles away from any support system that I had, that I built up for the last 4 years. I'm like, this ain't faith, God, I don't know what is. And I gotta tell you, God just sort of slapped me around again and said, hey, are you trusting me? Are you focusing on me? Or are you looking at literally anything else? Because anything else is wrong. And one by one, God should take me through one day at a time. And some days were certainly harder than others, but let me tell you, I'm at the right place. It was just a point that God said, look, this is messy. This whole thing is a mess. It was kind of that recognition of things just being a mess. Father Mark has this great line. If you haven't heard it yet, you probably will if you spend any more than 5 minutes with him. He says, life is messy, right? And he's right. Life is just messy. It's gross, kind of silly, stupid at times, but it's messy all the time. And if anybody here thinks, oh, well, I don't have a mess, you're delusional. You got to think about this because, I mean, it's fascinating to me because what happened by going out to St. Myron is this, is that God said, look, it doesn't matter what comes down the pipe. If I want you here, I'm the only one who can make this happen. You got to trust me. Because it's only me. And it's always only been me. And that's it. And here's where I'd like to kind of transition into some other points, sort of off of the personal topic. Bishop Barron wrote a great little book, which I highly recommend you getting. It's called The Letter to a Suffering Church. It's not an official document. It's just his his thoughts on the matter, his recognition of where we've been, what needs to happen next. And it's more of a personal, more of a spiritual one that's coming out as talks. But I like this quote that he has. If you think that we've never been in the worst place in the church, listen to this one. He says that the worst pontiff in history, arguably, was John the 12th. He said, reigned from 955 to 964, John's wickedness was so egregious that bishops and cardinals endeavored to remove him. Gathered in synod, they accused him of sacrilege, simony, perjury, murder, adultery, and incest. Summoned to defend himself against these charges, John instead excommunicated his accusers and executed judgment on them, striking off the hand of one, scourging another, and removing the nose and ears of a third. We've been in bad places, okay? I think it's safe to say that if the Pope was doing that, we've had worse, okay? Now, I'm not saying that this is anything to laugh off, because it's not. It's something that's very serious. Something we have to look at seriously. Look at what is happening in seminaries. Look at what's happening in parishes. Look at what's happening in our own personal and spiritual lives. And I will say this from a guy who's been in formation now for 5 years, going on 6. They are. They push this stuff, and they make sure we're clear, that we're open, we're honest, we're dealing with stuff. Things that we didn't do in past generations. The guys are doing I want to also maybe point to a more spiritual sense of this, and this is John Henry Newman. He says this: "The course of Christianity is but one series of troubles and disorders. Every century is like every other, and to those who live in it, seems the worse than all times before. The church is ever ailing. Religion seems ever expiring. Schisms dominant. The light of truth dim. Its adherents scattered. The cause of Christ is ever in its last agony." This is brilliance. Because we have to recognize the fact that Christ was not surprised that we would be suffering or that there'd be idiots. I mean, heck, he chose 12, and already one of those betrayed him. He knew this was coming down the pipe. It's not like he's surprised somewhere down the line that somebody does some horrible thing. Sin is not surprising to Christians. We're well aware of it. That's why we have confession. That's why we recognize the fact that we are sinners. It's a point that we're not surprised by it. It's hard when people try to divorce themselves from that recognition of sinfulness, because it's hard to recognize that. It is. It's hard to recognize the fact that I can't do anything on my own. And so we have to look at a basic question. Who is Jesus Christ? Many people, I'm sure, throughout your time through social media, the news, whatever, you've heard all sorts of weird theories about who Jesus Christ is. And there's plenty of horrible ones out there. One, is he a prophet? Well, he could be a prophet. That's sort of the Islamic view, that he's a prophet of sorts and he does cool stuff and okay, whatever. Nice guy, which is sort of more liberal sort of view, is it? I'm not talking politically, but just religiously liberal sort of view. He was just a really nice guy. You know, he was the kind of guy you want to go into a bar and have a beer with, right? He's like your buddy. It's like, not really. Okay. And then the other question is, maybe he's a bro. Is Jesus just like a bro? He's like kind of like the guy like, hey, you know what? I want you to be cool, but if you're not, that's fine. Like, no. Jesus is not any of these, right? Jesus is not the kind of guy you want to sit in a bar with. Jesus is a frightening figure. And I think C.S. Lewis says he's either a lunatic or he's the Lord. Really, like that's got to be it, right? Because here's a guy who's not saying, like so many others, follow this particular path, follow this particular train of thought. He's saying, no, follow me. And the guarantees involve being killed, being like hated by everybody, being denied by your family, and then there's a hope of resurrection. Now that ain't a sales pitch. I don't know what it is. But could you tell me anybody in history, and it's sort of a rhetorical question because you can't, who's had more people shed their blood for him than anybody else? Who else in history had people laying down their lives just so that a little wafer wouldn't be crushed or stepped upon? That's who Jesus Christ is. He is a frightening figure. Someone who says, I have shown the strength of my arm, I have scattered the proud in their conceit. He has allowed himself to be nailed to a cross, the worst form of torture. It was designed by Romans to inflict the most amount of pain. It was designed so that they would actually asphyxiate on the cross. They would choke on their own blood. It was horrifying. And he says, come at me. Give me the worst that you got. And he wakes up in 3 days, and he's like, yep, come follow me. That's who Jesus Christ is, right? And the scary part is we would rather save ourselves. We would rather say, oh, no, you know what? I get the fact that you did the cross thing, but I feel like there's two ways we do this in. Either what really means is I don't actually believe in what you're saying, and so I can save myself and I don't need you, and that's fine. Just go. It's great that you're a prophet, you're a nice guy, I can have a beer with you, but I'm not actually gonna do anything. I'll live my life and that sort of thing. Or it's more along the lines of, which I say I fall into, where it's like, let me save myself for you. I want to do all these great things without you so I can show you how much good that I can do. And I think here, to counter that second one, I got to point to Cardinal McCarrick, who I think everybody's aware of who that is. He had me do these horrible, horrible cases of abuse. I remember there was the bishop in whose Diocese of McCarrick now resides, came to talk to the seminary at St. Michael. And he visited Mr. McCarrick at the time. And he said to him, they were in conversation, and he said to this bishop, he said, I wish I'd prayed more. He said, I thought if I kept on doing stuff for God, I thought if I kept on doing good things, all these things would just go away. That's just not how it worked. It's frightening for a young seminarian to hear that that was the key. That all I wish I'd done was, I wish I'd been more devoted to that holy hour. Man. But this is what happens when we try to go outside of Christ. And here I'd like to look at some beautiful words by a man called Thomas à Kempis. And if you've never heard about the Imitation of Christ, which is a spiritual classic, I highly recommend it. I try to recommend books when I can, because I don't do a lot of reading. But sorry, Bishop, you shouldn't have seen that. Anyways, I do lose time reading. No, I try to recommend books when I can, so that if somebody has a chance to go back and maybe look up what else this person said, it's always helpful. So I love Bishop Barron, but this is also excellent. And the language is a little old, so bear with me. But this is what he writes. He says, "There is no sanctity if thou, O Lord, withdraw thy hand. No wisdom avails if thou cease to govern us. No strength is of any help if thou cease to preserve us. No chastity is secure without thy protection. No self-custody profits us if thy holy vigilance be not nigh us. For left to ourselves we sink and perish, but by thee visited we are raised up and live. We are unsteadfast, but by thee we are strengthened. We are tepid, but by thee we are inflamed." See, I think there becomes a challenge that in this generation, I would say specifically, that we've seen everything fail. I mean, I know from my perspective, I've seen on some level everything fail. We've seen we can't trust school systems in some sense because of the crazy stuff that they're always doing, or because of abuse cases in their systems. We can't trust even parents in the home sometimes. That's how sad it's become. We have to police them, which is horrible, because there's so many bad cases there. Divorce happens. 50% of people get divorced. We have Catholics leaving the church left to right. We have people going off and doing crazy things where they don't even know what clothes to wear, what bodies they belong in. It's horrible. We've seen everything fail. And we become so caught up in the failure that there's nothing left. You can't look at something that's like a hole all the time and be like, why is it never full? That's what we're looking at. We're looking at this big, dark pit that's just depressing sometimes. But what needs to happen is we need to then recognize Christ. Without Christ, nothing works. It just doesn't. I've studied guys from the heights of philosophy all the way down to the most modern guys. And let me tell you, the one thing they're always missing, the reason why their philosophies always fail, it's always because they try to do something outside of Jesus Christ. See, what Jesus Christ does is he allows himself to be sacrificed so that we can become like he is. So Jesus is both fully God and fully man. He becomes man so that we may become God. I remember not that long ago, I was sitting in the youth group there, which we have on Sunday nights. And it was very nice. And I remember at some point I was just, I was sitting back and I was listening, and they always have a little song that they sing at the end, a little thing. And I sit there and I try to do what I can to be part of it. And I just stopped and I was listening to the kids singing. These are all high school kids, right? With plenty of garbage that they have to go through in their day-to-day life. Trust me, more than enough that I would probably cringe at having to see. And there they are, 8 o'clock at night, in a room in Michael House, singing praise to God, when they could be watching Netflix, Hulu, chatting with their friends or whatever. They're there praying. There's no obligation to be there, perfectly optional. But there they are. And as I let the words that they were saying just hit my ears, something hit me. It's all worth it. Every single bit of it. Every time you have to wake up in the middle of the night to hold some dying old lady's hand, it's worth it. Every time you have to sit in a class that you don't really want to sit in and listen to some professor that you don't particularly enjoy, just so you can get up to this thing called ordination, it's worth it. It's worth it because if somebody in that room, somebody young or somebody old, gets to this point in their life where they're just like, I get it. Jesus is the one I was looking for. This is it. I don't have to be afraid of anything anymore. I can literally face any battle. I can face any sort of torture. And trust me, if you know the saints, you know that's true. And I could do everything and literally anything for Christ. Because I love him. Because he's loved me before I even existed. If you don't know anything about the North American martyrs, I highly recommend it. They are fascinating characters. I won't even go into their deaths, but a lot of them died horribly brutal deaths, and some of them were brutally tortured before they actually went back to where they were from, their home country in Europe, got more volunteers, and then came back to continue to evangelize people. So in 1625, Jean de Brebeuf was evangelizing to these Indians, these Native Americans in Quebec. And he goes back to France, I believe, and is saying, look, okay, I want to get more volunteers. So I want to read to you his letter that he sends out to his fellow Jesuits. And mind you, Jesuits, they trained for like 12 years, high intellectuals, very smart men. These men were like the Marine Corps of like the religious at the time. These men were like hardcore, they were great, brilliant, smart, everything. This is his way of charming the young men into going over to the Americas. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read a couple points of this. He said, instead of being a great theologian as you may be in France, you may reckon on being there a humble scholar. And then, good God, with what masters, exposed to the laughter of all the savages. The Huron language will be your St. Thomas and your Aristotle. Glib as you are, you must decide for a long time to be mute among the barbarians because they didn't know the language. They would have just had these great scholars now coming here, realizing they can't say a darn thing. All that great knowledge they spent all those times late nights studying for, gone. He continues, without exaggeration, you will pass 6 months of winter in almost continual discomforts. Excessive cold, smoke, the annoyance of savages who surround our fireplace from morning until evening looking for food. For rest, thus far we have had only roses. As we have Christians in almost every village, we must expect to make rounds throughout the year. And add to all of this, that our lives depend upon a single thread. Your cabin might burn down at any moment, or malcontent might cleave open your head because you can't make it rain. That's just good stuff. Oh man, you can't make this stuff up, it's so good. This is the point, I think, that I want to kind of close on. Maybe two things. There's something real here. And it's something that's been real forever. And we just haven't recognized it. I remember when I went to the March for Life down in DC, we're at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, Basilica of the Immaculate, I can't remember, it's like a big long name. Anyway, I was sitting there and I was a young seminarian, and I sat aside to pray in one of the side chapels there. If you ever get a chance to go, it is beautiful. There are side chapels literally everywhere. And they're all like mosaics and just beautiful work. It's great. It's like American, but like Roman, and it's really awesome. So I realize half of you don't even care about any of that, but that's okay. I care about it, so I'm just going to say it. You have to sit there and listen to me. I got to this point where I'm sitting there and I'm praying, and I'm just trying to say, God, where do you want me in my life? Where do you want me? And in my classes at Providence College at the time, we've been going over a lot of Old Testament scriptures, Isaac, Abraham, Jacob. We've been going over so many of these, supposedly the bad God, right? Which is just a complete fallacy. But anyway, we've been going over all this great stuff and all these great moments of God parting the Red Sea and all this great stuff, and this powerful, terrifying figure, right, who's God. And I looked down at my hands, and I just had to think, if everything goes the way it's going right now, These hands will call down the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob upon an altar in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. That's what Jesus Christ does for us. Jesus isn't waiting for you to get your mess in order. Jesus is cutting through the mess and saying, I'm there. I'm already there. I've already been there, and I've come back for you. And that's what I'm doing. That's where I am. I'm already there. You think you're hurting? I got you. I'm already there. I'm ready to be beside you. And I think, on maybe a more personal note, I don't know, I can also say there's no guarantee of priesthood for me at this point. There isn't. Tomorrow God could decide where you're not called to the priesthood, you go home, and that's fine. Because if I'm trying to do God's will, that has to be an option. But if I am called to be the priesthood, I hope this is the kind of priest I am. And my dad, I'm going to embarrass for half a second. Any of my siblings here knows this to be true. There's a great sort of contemporary song that sings of God the Father as saying, there's no wall you won't kick down, no wall you won't tear down coming after me. Well, I realized very early on as a child that there really couldn't be anything that came between me and my dad. That if my dad needed to get to me because I was in danger for any reason whatsoever, he would move any mountain, he would push any person, he would climb anything that needed to happen just to make sure that I was okay. My dad would stop at literally nothing. You would have to have killed him in order to make him stop. And even then, I'm pretty sure he would come back because he's a Marine. So, that's the kind of priest I would want to be. That's the kind of priest that I grew up with. That's the kind of priest that I know. That's the kind of priest that, thanks be to God, we have a ton of in the Diocese of Manchester. We have guys who are willing to go the distance. Bishop Bradley, the first bishop of Manchester, went the distance. He died of exhaustion, working hard for our diocese. He went everywhere and did everything, having from no priest in the diocese to having enough priests in the diocese by his work, so that every person in New Hampshire, mind you, this is like 1880s, there's no highways going up, there's no 93. So that every person in the diocese could have a priest at their deathbed. He was that kind of priest. He was the one who said, Jesus Christ is who he says he is. His bride is the church, and I will die for that. That's what a man does when he prostrates himself right before his ordination. He lays down on his stomach, head down, face on the floor, and saying, God, this is it. Everything's yours. There's nothing left. I'm holding back nothing. So if God willing, I am to be a priest. That is what I would want to be. But for your part, I recommend falling in love again. Don't fall in love with the stupidity that is many parts of the church, and we have our fair share of it. But don't we all? Fall in love again with Jesus Christ. Fall in love again with the universal faith that is the Catholic Church, that says no matter where you are in your life, we're there. We will bring you Jesus. That's the faith that we profess. And that's the faith that, God willing, all of us will lay down our lives for.